Thanks, everybody. And thank you all for being here today, and thank you to Michael for kicking things off in our discussion of casting the audience. So I am Matthew Bamberg-Johnson, and I am one of the co-artistic directors of the Speakeasy Society, not the Speakeasy. We are a Los Angeles-based immersive entertainment company making intimate and epic works in unexpected places. And we just celebrated our 5-year anniversary. Thank you very much, thank you. And we've done about 14 shows during that time, many of which have been remounted for audiences of 1 to 125. So I'm here today to talk to you about casting the audience. I think in order to begin that conversation, we need to talk about the fundamental difference of audience and immersive is that they are an essential part of the show. The show literally could not happen if the audience was not there. It's not like a proscenium theater where we could just roll regardless of how many people there are in the seats. And they're living, breathing, real people. So they have some degree of agency. They can tip this table over, right? But it's up to us as creators to inform them about how we want that agency to be used. So I'm going to speak in some really broad categories about the different ways that we can inform the audience about that. So to put it another way, there's always a role to play, but some pieces give you more of a character than others, okay? So in order to cast the audience effectively, we need to first decide who is our audience. And that doesn't mean who makes up the audiences and who's sitting in this room, though that's very important as well. But who are they to you? Who are they to you as creators or performers in the piece? What is your relationship, as Michael was talking about as well? So a couple options here. One is that the audience comes in as themselves, right? We acknowledge who you are and your history as you come into the room. So their role within the piece is to be present as themselves. They may be invited to interact, but they're not expected to create a character or make a history for themselves. They can still do that within certain pieces, and we as performers are going to treat what they give us as being truthful. Yeah, so thank you. Sweet. So that's one way to view this. If they exist as themselves, often they will act more like a witness or an observer of an event, and sometimes they will be able to interact, but won't change the final outcome. Hamlet's always going to die. The Death Star is always going to blow up. Right? You know, these are things that just need to happen narratively in order for the story to make any sense. So in one of our pieces called The Stronger, which is an adaptation of the Strindberg play, it was set in a functioning restaurant for an audience of 1 while patrons are eating and drinking around them. You were invited to witness an encounter between these two old friends, but when you're given a chance to interact with the characters, you do it as yourself. Right? So even if I say, oh, Sam, gosh, Sam, it's so good to see you. Sam and I know each other through yoga. Right? I've given him a little bit of a character, but then when we have a conversation later on, I'm not expecting you to be Sam from yoga. I'm expecting you to be yourself. So also in Ebenezer, which was our immersive Christmas carol, this is the Ghost of Christmas Present at a table with some patrons here. You're invited to the Fezziwigs party, but you're coming in as yourselves as well. This is more of a sandbox style event where you wander around and follow the different characters. You can find the deeper drama going on in the Cratchit household. You can get advice from the different spirits. But Scrooge still has to go through his journey and his process. So the interactions that you have are not ultimately going to affect that narrative outcome. Other examples from LA Immersive, where audiences engage in this way, are things like Red Flags from Capital W. If any of you have a chance to see or heard about that, I would say the Willows also functions in that similar way. The Tension Experience, things of that nature. You're coming in with your own history. Another option, the audience is playing specific characters. So the audience action can dictate what version of the story they experience and explore and how the characters respond. And as creators, we can choose, in some cases, to give the audience a character or allow the audience to tell you what they want to play. And I'll speak more about this in relationship to our Kansas collection pieces coming up. So the important thing here is that they have a specific dramatic function in the piece that you're creating. They have a role. They have a team that they're playing for. In Sleep No More, we have a role. We're ghostly witnesses to the Scottish King's demise. In the new Void Star Wars VR experience, right, you go in as rebel insurgents disguised as stormtroopers. You have a role. You have a task. You're a part of a team. So that's one way that we can cast the audience as well, is to give them that kind of identity. In The Nest, we are told that we are the only relatives of a recently deceased mysterious woman. So all of those experiences give you a character to play. Now, there's a third option, which is that we can cast the audience all as the same person. They can represent the same individual. And we've done this most acutely in our Johnny cycle, which I'll be talking about next. So the whole audience is given a singular character, and then they're asked to share that character experience with the group. Obviously, all characters are not experiencing the same part of the story. All parts accessed are equally important and intimate, but they explore different aspects of that character's story. And this, one of the benefits here is it allows for everyone to be addressed intimately by name. So if I say, you know, Johnny, what happened, right? That feels so much more deep than me just going and saying, what happened to you? I'm reaching out to make a personal connection. So this can also be recast over the course of the show because it can be somewhat limiting to have only one character in your piece. But we'll talk more about how that world extends and complicates. Okay, so let's talk about the Johnny cycle. So 3 years ago, we began a process of building a series around the Dalton Trumbo novel, Johnny Got His Gun. For those of you who maybe aren't familiar with the narrative, it's about a soldier who ships off to World War I, and he's blown up in a trench, but he survives, though he loses his arms, his legs, his face, essentially all of his faculties, and he's left trapped in his mind, and he can't tell the difference between when he's asleep and when he's awake, and what's a memory and what's his imagination. And it's a really harrowing anti-war novel. It's about 300 pages long. I would recommend it if you haven't checked it out. But it seems like an unlikely thing to engage in as an interactive, immersive experience, right? Because how are you going to put someone in a position of visceral connection, emotional connection, with a character who can't see or hear or speak? But it felt important to us to do, and important to do that in a visceral way. Sorry, just want to circle back. One thing I missed is the most important thing, why are we doing this to begin with, right? Why do we give the audience a role? Because it grounds them in the experience. It allows them not to wonder if they're doing something wrong. I want to know that there's a plan, that I have a way of fitting into the whole piece. It puts me at ease. So all of these categories, again, are a little bit oversimplified, and some of them blend together, but we'll break that down a bit more. So in the Johnny cycle, we broke this down into a cycle of 3 shows over the course of 3 years, because the experience of the book felt so big that we didn't want to try to tackle it all at once. We use various methods to try to provide audiences with this visceral connection to this character of Johnny. So one of the first things that we talk about, and Colin was talking about this a little bit earlier, is the experience of the portal. When does your experience begin? And we want to make sure that these experiences begin as quickly as possible, that my experience of the character can start at the point of buying the ticket, if at all possible. And in the Johnny cycle, in the first experience, you arrived and you were given a draft card, which also functioned as a train ticket from a conductor character, because trains play a big part in the story. It's labeled with your name as Johnny, and we sort of evolved that token throughout the course of the run, where by the second show everyone was wearing these lanyards, which were similar to the things that would be placed on injured soldiers who were found out in the field but couldn't be identified because they were too badly disfigured, as Johnny was. And fun fact, that also functions as our program, because we're able to give that as a keepsake on the way back. So you can take that one, put it in your pocket for free. And in the third piece, we use this as sort of a backstage pass for people who are functioning as extras in the filmed version of Johnny Got His Gun, because that's how we were onboarding people through that portal to begin with. Portals are a great opportunity to address things like safety concerns. So in one of our spaces, we were at the Mountain View Mausoleum in Altadena, and they informed us that in the case of an earthquake, what we were actually supposed to do was not move into the archways, but get to the center of the room, because the building's very stable, but the one thing that will definitely fall are the marble slabs covering the tombs. So the PAs educating the extras had to work that into their spiel at the beginning of the show. So just looking for opportunities in that onboarding process. Okay, so another way that we try to deepen emotional impact, in addition to calling people by these prescribed names, is through a prompting system that we just call you say prompting, right? So in Johnny 1, they're dealing with a lot of the experiences of what it was like for Johnny before he went away to war. And there's a heartbreaking scene in the book about saying goodbye to his girlfriend, Corinne. And so Corinne might say, or well, let's use the other example, saying goodbye to your mom. So the mom says to you as Johnny, Johnny, if you leave this house, don't you ever come back. And then I, as the actor, would say, and you say, I have to go. Go on, say I have to go. Yeah, and as you say those words, you complete the circuit, right? So I've put an offer out to you, and rather than just extending that to you and leaving it there, I invite the participation for you to give it back to me, and then you feel it in a way that you might not otherwise. And by giving you the you say prompt in a very simple phrase, I'm not leaving you confused, right? There's no way to do it wrong. Unless you're intentionally like deep sixing the experience, and then it's your fault. But try to make it as easy as possible for these audience members to embody the character, and that has worked fairly effectively. Although anecdotally, in the goodbye scene, we learned that people really jump into this when Corinne is speaking to someone else as a proxy for Johnny, and she says, "Kiss me, Johnny," and well, they did. They did. So we adjusted that in subsequent runs. But just another anecdote about, in the example that I mentioned of saying goodbye to your mother, that we performed the first show at the Pasadena American Legion and invited many of the veterans who were part of the Legion to come and see it. And there was one older gentleman who was pulled for the kind of one-on-one experience of saying goodbye to the mom because everyone else is standing around witnessing it. And he just disintegrated. And afterwards, he shared, coming up to us shaking and thanking us, he shared that that had happened to him, that he had signed up, and his mother had insisted that he not go, and while he was gone and deployed, she had died. So this was an opportunity for him to say goodbye to his mother through the framework of theater. So it was really a powerful tool to allow people to have those emotional experiences. So let's see. Okay, so now let's talk about this idea of choices, right? And Michael got at this a little bit earlier. I wonder how much we actually want choice and agency, right? If anyone is a gamer and you play open world games, it's very easy to make stupid choices. I'm just going to run off this cliff again and again and again, and you can do that. Thank you. But we want to make sure that it's not going to defeat the ultimate narrative that we're trying to get to. So in this example, you're invited to a boardroom where you're trying to make a decision about who to send away to war, and you can pick platoon A or platoon B. The general's still going to send them both, but your emotional response to that experience changes based on the choice that you've made. So you feel the judgment of your fellow audience members or things of that nature. So space, also super important and a great way to cast the audience and transmit information. So this is the American Legion. We use that dealing with this feeling of the character's patriotism, this inherent need to want to serve your country. The second Johnny space that we used was St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Glendale. Johnny has a lot of wrestling with his understanding of his creator and how he could be put in this position and why humans do this to one another. And then we used, as I mentioned, the Mountain View Mausoleum because Johnny is essentially, at the end of the story, a living man surrounded by dead people. And all he wants to do is be able to cross over to be with the dead, and he's not able to do so. Gesture is another really effective way to try to transmit casting. So in this scene, we're juxtaposing the idea of the bakery from the book with basic training. So we teach the audience how to do certain things, knead the dough, separate the dough, and then throughout the course of the scene, the meaning of those gestures shifts. So this becomes stab and twist. This becomes snap it, right? So the same gestures then change their meaning as the piece goes on. So I'm just going to rocket through here because we don't have a lot of time. So going now to the idea of changing roles and casting. So as I mentioned, when we came into Johnny 3, you are essentially extras and you're prompted to, now everyone cry, more crying, cut. And then we break that fiction when Dalton Trumbo himself actually comes and says, Johnny, what are you doing here? Why are you remembering this? Right? So that we can change the role through the fevered state, because the rules of the game, the rules of the world are such that the doctor becomes Jesus, the nurse becomes mom. all in his memories. All right, so things get mixed up. We also pulled audiences up to be part of the House of American Activities Committee trials, which Dalton Trumbo was blacklisted during McCarthy era for being a communist, because he was. So the audience members, again, through the USAFE prompting, were able to hand down those sentences. So we have our proxy judge and committee members, and there's also an audience bailiff over there as well. This is just some more shots of the space that we were able to be in. So I'm going to rocket ahead because we have a lot to get through. So I want to talk briefly about something that we are working on now, which is called the Kansas Collection. So the Kansas Collection came about. We were very lucky to be asked to create a piece for independent game festival called Indiecade, which is hosted down at USC. And so we started to investigate how do we apply game mechanics to our narrative pieces, thinking about some of our favorite video games, Firewatch, Fallout, things where you have a lot of independent agency, and the Telltale series where it feels like these choices really matter, even if it's steering you down towards a singular narrative path. So Johnny shows were about 1 to 3 hours long with audiences of 10 to 30. The Kansas performances are about 20 to 30 minutes long, and they're produced for 2 to 4 audience members at a time with a higher throughput. So we're doing many, many shows a night. By keeping the scale of these performances small, we can really focus on giving everyone those intimate moments, because when we go to sleep no more, that's why people are trampling each other to try to get those one-on-one experiences. And we wanted to provide that for everybody, kind of as a guarantee. So this is an ongoing series. I'm going to try not to spoil too much, but I'll give you just a general idea of how it works. In the Kansas Collection, it's based on the later Wizard of Oz books, where after Dorothy has left, the Scarecrow becomes king. And in our version, it's a little bit dystopian, jackbooted troops, things of that nature. You are given information that a mysterious tent has appeared in someone's backyard in a residential neighborhood. You show up, and it becomes clear as you meet the gatekeeper that they think that they are in Kansas, and they think that it is the Dust Bowl, and they are offering you an opportunity to step into another world. So you're brought into this initial intake tent where this Private Joe Files tells you all about the wonders of Oz and the glory of the Scarecrow King. And then the two of you come together, you're separated, and you go into 2 different rooms where you're interviewed by intake officers. Now, here's where it's fun, because the way that you answer the questions then gets captured, and you become sorted into different factions. Those factions then give you code words or scavenger hunts or ARX content, other ARX content that is going to remain uniquely tagged to you throughout the rest of the series. You have certain missions that you have to go on, some of which involve posting things on social media as you meet the characters as you move throughout the piece. And because it's a shared experience, this is one of the pitfalls. You have to make sure that everything remains consistent. So the wizard can't die in your story, right, but be alive for everybody else. So that's one of the things we have to pay attention to. Also, it's difficult in terms of casting, because people associate particular faces with particular characters. So you got to make sure that people are in it for the full duration and run. One thing that was really fun in this is trying to predict how audiences are going to react. And I think that's one of the big lessons and takeaways, the final thoughts here, is that when you give people agency, if you decide that you're going to give them the opportunity to interact, you have to be prepared for what they might do. In the Kansas Collection, they created a completely separate faction that were Dorothy loyalists, and they were having secret meetings and doing all these things. And we had to figure out a way to try to bring them back into the game and capture all the effort that they had been putting into it to make sure that, that they were going to have a good experience. So some of these big questions that I think we should ask when we're thinking about casting the audience are, do we want them to have actual agency or the perception thereof? And how are we going to communicate to that? Communicate that to them in as seamless of a way as possible, so that you don't end up in an experience where people are tearing the space apart thinking that they're in a puzzle room experience, when in fact you haven't designed it to be that, because you haven't hidden anything anywhere. And these are nice things, please don't break them. So I think communication is key, and then deciding again, what is the identity, what is the relationship that they want them to have to us moving through. Just very quickly, because I know we need to go, I just want to tell you, we were recently commissioned by the Broad Stage in Santa Monica to produce an immersive experience for them based on the Wild Party. So that's actually going to be going up in about a month, and the rest of the team is at home working on it as we speak. But we're very excited to kind of serve as ambassadors for Immersive, bringing our work to those West Side audiences, many of which have not been exposed to Immersive yet. So just trying to broaden the net so that everyone can speak a common language. I hope you have a chance to find me later. We can chat more about the ways in which we cast the audience, and I would love to hear your thoughts as well. So thank you very much.